Hey there. Despite what you may have heard, Iran is not the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. For 6 years, I lived in Istanbul, Turkey, and Turkey for, almost 2 decades now, has been run by a guy who, quite rightly, has a terrible reputation in the United States and Europe. One of the most frustrating, infuriating things about Erdogan is the way that he defines terrorism. When Erdogan says terrorist, he can be talking about anybody from suicide bombers to armed resistance groups to peaceful political opponents to journalists who criticize him. Basically, anybody who opposes Erdogan is accused of terrorism. Turkey is an extreme case, but we can see this sort of thing all over the world. In recent years, China has built up an Orwellian nightmare in Xinjiang province. The Muslim majority of that province has been subjected to a state-of-the-art system of surveillance and re-education camps, essentially prisons that hold as many as 1 million people. All of this horror is justified in the name of counter-terrorism. The definition of the word terrorism all over the world is a political weapon. At this point, the word has been so abused as to be essentially meaningless. It's important to remember that when the United States calls Iran the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, it's doing exactly what China does. Just like Turkey's President Erdogan, the United States defines terrorism to mean anything it doesn't like.
Iran destabilizes this entire region. It supports proxy militias and terrorist groups. It is an arms dealer to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and Iran conducts cyber hacking campaigns. And it supports the murderous Assad regime as well. Unlike the prior administration, we will not neglect the vast scope of Iran's terrorism.
Vast scope indeed. So according to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo there, almost anything that Iran tries to do in foreign policy is terrorism. If they try to support their decades-long ally in Syria, it's terrorism. If they try to hack a computer, it's terrorism. So I wonder if the U.S.'s National Security Agency is a terrorist organization. If you scratch the surface even a little bit, it becomes very clear that the U.S. definition of terrorism is not about what is done, it's about who is doing it. This is the exact same way that President Erdogan and Xi Jinping approach the question. That's not a very good look for the United States. Now, don't get me wrong. Iran, just like the United States, definitely does a number of things that fit even the strictest definitions of terrorism. Your definition of terrorism is almost certainly different from mine. Opinions vary widely on this sort of thing. Something like 95% of the world agrees that certain Saudi Arabia-inspired jihadist acts, like the 9/11 attacks or the beheadings that ISIS does, those things are definitely terrorism, and most people agree on that. When it comes to the kind of stuff that Iran funds, though, opinions vary a lot more widely. Most people in the United States and Israel see Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist organizations. That view may officially be shared by many other governments, but in my experience, that's not the way that most of the world's people see these organizations. For me personally, I like to differentiate between actions. For example, I don't want my country, the United States, to be judged solely by the fact that we work with Al-Qaeda in Yemen and Syria. There's a lot more to the United States than just supporting terrorism. And I think that's probably true of Hezbollah as well. I am happy to call Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists when they shoot missiles at Israeli cities, but are they terrorist organizations when they provide social services? Or are they terrorist organizations when they're fighting ISIS and other suicide-bombing jihadists in Syria and Iraq? That's a lot of what Iran has been funding for the past 5 years, by the way. So according to the U.S. government, even when Iran is funding organizations that kill people that the entire world understands to be the worst terrorists on offer, the Iranians are terrorists. Basically, it doesn't make any sense at all. Calling Iran the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism is politically motivated nonsense. Serious people should stop doing it. And also, as longtime viewers of this channel know, all of the most universally condemned and vicious terrorist acts got their start in Saudi Arabia. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and if you click that bell next to the subscribe button, you can get notifications every time I upload a video. Thanks.